This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm Sam Marshall. The show is live and broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube with the entire show available on your YouTube channel. We take a look at the impact xenophobia has on businesses. We unpack research conducted by Save the Children South Africa in Gauteng on children who are affected by xenophobia. And women currently hold less than 4% of CEO positions. We find out why. But first, let's get the day's news with Anine Domel.
Good morning, I'm Anine Domel. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. A fourth suspect will join three others in court today in connection with the murder of Mozambican national Emmanuel Sithole. Sithole died in Alexandra, north of Johannesburg, over the weekend. The 35-year-old was stabbed to death. Three of his alleged attackers were arrested on Sunday, and a fourth suspect was arrested last night. Police say the killing cannot yet be linked to attacks against foreign nationals in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. EFF leader Julius Malema says no amount of intimidation will prevent him from continuing with his anti-xenophobia campaign. This after an EFF member was shot from a hostel while party members were preparing for Malema's arrival in Alexandra yesterday. Malema also said the killing of Mozambican Emmanuel Sithole at the weekend was a pure act of criminality. He visited the township to spread a message of peace and unity.
All of us, we must be ashamed of this incident. Alexander is in mourning because of the death of Sithole, which was caused by acts of criminality masquerading as xenophobia.
Lolly Jackson's alleged killer will know today if he private medical care. The Palm Ridge Magistrates Court on the East Rand is expected to rule whether George Luca will be freed. The Department of Correctional Services has applied to have Luca released from custody to be treated privately for lung cancer. The state intends opposing the Correctional Services application. Luca is accused of killing the nightclub owner in 2010. Unpaid teachers in the Northwest have been promised to have their salaries paid by Thursday. The teachers' union SATU is protesting against the non-payment of temporary teachers in the Northwest. The union staged a sit-in at the Department of Finance's offices in Mahikeng last night. SATU says over 100 teachers have not been paid for the past 4 months. The department says proper documentation was not submitted on time. Two survivors of the deadliest known shipwreck of migrants trying to reach Europe have been arrested. The two suspects were arrested on suspicion of assisting in the smuggling of people. Up to 900 people are thought to have died when their vessel overturned and sank off the coast of Libya at the weekend. And the man known as the Boston bomber is set to return to court today for the next phase of his trial. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's sentence will either be life without parole or death by lethal injection. Tsarnaev has been found guilty of all 30 counts resulting from the bombings, and 3 people were killed and more than 260 wounded in the 2013 bombings. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Sam, over to you.
Anine, thank you very much. Now, as episodes of xenophobic attacks continue to cause disruption in certain areas of South Africa, some schools and foreign-owned shops remain closed due to the ongoing violence, but there are concerns that the continuous violence has had a negative impact on South African businesses operating elsewhere in Africa. Now, reports suggest that petrochemical giant Sasol was directly affected as it was forced to stop work in Mozambique. Earlier this year, we were joined by University of Johannesburg chairperson of African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy, Professor Chris Landsberg, who predicted that it was only a matter of time before we had repeats of the xenophobic attacks that happened in 2008. He's here in studio with us today to tell us more. He's also joined today by, of course, the president of SACI, the South Africa Commerce and Industry, President Vusi Khumalo, talking about the impact on business, and we're going to unpack it with our two gentlemen. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me here on Newsroom. Professor, maybe let's start this conversation with you, because it was only in January that you predicted this conversation, that we were going to have this conversation around xenophobia, and that it was going to escalate. What were the indicators back then that made you make those statements?
Look, first of all, many people use 2008 as the supposed turning point. Sad to say that this thing has been with us almost for as long as we've been a democracy. We're coming of age this year. I think the dramatic point I was making on the 26th of January, I remember very vividly, with your colleague Eben Janssen, was that it's only a matter of time before Africans will turn on South Africans in the rest of the continent. So just to repeat to you, this thing for the first time reared its head in 1998, 2002, 2008, and of course now the sad events of now. In short, we are a traumatized state. We are a violent society, and that dramatic picture on Sunday, where these angry people pounced on this Mozambican. I'm sad to say to you that this is happening every weekend in the townships and in our communities.
Professor, before I bring Vusi Khumalo into this conversation, I want to play that clip. I just want the viewers, for those that didn't watch that interview you had with Eben Janssen, this is exactly what you said. Let's take a look at this.
Friends of mine, they say they come from poorer African countries, but their societies are much more tranquil. I love Tanzania, and I love going to Tanzania. I can tell you Tanzania doesn't experience the kind of social ills and violence that we, yet it's a much poorer country. Now, you know what they say? Not only is there a need for collective responsibility, but this entire society of ours needs to go for psychiatric treatment. We haven't dealt with our problems of the past. That's why there's this resort to violence. Let me just throw in another spin in the works here. Here is a country claiming to be a leader in Africa, or at least having some leadership aspirations in Africa. If you can't point to a constituency in Africa to support your African aspirations, in fact, you are targeting people from other African countries. I want to make a dire prediction for you and say to you, it's only a matter of time that we might see a backlash against South Africans in other African countries for the way we treat their people in our own society.
Okay, so that's a conversation we had with Professor Chris Landsberg, who joins us here today. Mr. Khumalo, let me bring you into this conversation, and I think we're talking about stability. In 2008, we saw the wave of xenophobic attacks. We're now in 2015. Just draw a comparison for me very quickly in what business we're going through then and what business is going through now. Because I think Professor was quite critical when he talked about stability being the key to good business.
Thank you very much, and good morning to the listeners. Looking at 2008 to date, there's been a bit of a lull in the re-emergence of the xenophobic attacks. From a country's perspective, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And obviously the world is looking at South Africa as one of the countries in Africa, a preferred destination to do business with. The policies, the infrastructure, the whole business environment has got to be conducive to attract foreign direct investment that will lead us to growth in our economy. Obviously, what has happened is bad for publicity for a country that is in dire need for economic growth. However, this is not unique. I just want to mention this without a pinch of salt. If you look at what happened after Ghana received its independence, the economy was booming. All other neighboring African states flocked to Ghana. The same thing happened in Nigeria when the oil industry was doing very well. There was quite a large contingency of fellow African countries flocking into Nigeria. But because of the economic impact and the number of people that were in those respective countries, there was a backlash. Unfortunately, ours is violent. In their case, the locals in those respective countries, they felt threatened by foreign nationals coming to their countries to take their jobs. The point that I'm trying to highlight here, whilst the situation is not unique to South Africa, it's a human element and it's an economic factor. Obviously, the manner in which it is happening in our country, there is violence, there's denigration, there's dehumanization. That is totally unacceptable, and business is totally against it.
Let me ask Vusi a couple of questions. I mean, this is important. And Vus, this is not putting you on the spot. This is us trying to deal with a very serious phenomenon in our society. And I'm going to be very honest with you. Yes. I'm waiting for corporate South Africa, en masse, to take a stand against this thing.
Yes. And we haven't really seen that.
We haven't seen them even condemning it, let alone taking actions. Now I'm asking the question, what should it take? Now, this is not a beauty contest between somebody who in January predicted the backlash. I just happen to as my title suggests, I happen to work with the continent. And I really think we overrate ourselves. And if you think this is just a question I'm asking about corporate sector, I saw some analysts on radio and television yesterday who are so outraged by this, saying to government, lock them up, smoke them out. These very analysts, on paper, it's written, it's out there, all our views are out there. So if you've written something, you can't distance yourself from it. It's the same analyst who said 10 years ago, 15 years ago, South Africa is, quote unquote, the hegemon of Africa, the lead nation of Africa. We can impose our will in Africa. There's almost a superiority complex with which we suffer from. And what I've consistently argued is that, including on that program on the 26th, is that it's not democracy that's under threat, not even what's happening in Parliament, serious though it is. There is a social crisis in this country that is about to explode. And we've just seen the signs against foreigners now, but it's happening weekend in, weekend out.
And let me just touch on that very quickly, because I do think what the professor's talking about, how do we address this issue? Because we've heard so many South Africans, and yes, xenophobia needs to stop. And I think in the wake of that question, corporate South Africa seems to be very quiet, and we've seen everywhere, Facebook, Twitter, ordinary South Africans, presidents talking about our very own president on more than one occasion has addressed the nation, has done interviews around xenophobia, but we haven't seen the leaders of the big multinationals coming forward and saying, guys, this is actually wrong. Encouraging business to do ethical business so that we don't, because right or wrong, we're hearing South Africans saying that, well, they're hiring foreigners and paying them less money and we are not getting jobs. But what I'm saying is we haven't really seen corporate South Africa come out the way we've seen politicians, our ministers, ordinary people in the street galvanizing around this issue. Why haven't we?
I think that's quite a fair comment. But I can say for a fact that there are quite a number of initiatives that are currently at play. The initiatives like looking at collaborative, working together in terms of getting to the root of the challenges the country is faced with. Just recently, the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry had an esteemed guest, a daughter to the Pick and Pay boss, who not only pledged X amount of money, but called for other corporates to contribute. At the SABC level, there is a strong drive to canvass our members to actually not only talk, but to actually get into real things that they need to do in order to cap this scenario. Apart from being the broader spectrum of the South African society, the voice that is collective includes the corporate. Maybe what you are indicating is that there is no one single corporate that is coming out vociferously and strongly. But the voice of business through SABC, we are doing so. We've been constantly up and indicating what the challenges the country is faced with, and we still continue to do so.
Professor, let me bring you into this conversation, because we are seeing at an informal level, we're seeing businesses closing down. We're seeing people that that in one way or another they're driving economies. We can argue it which if it's South Africans or Africans, but there is an economy that's being driven forward by these small informal businesses. They've now closed down. People are moving out. They're now staying in refugee camps. These are businessmen that are now no longer selling those loaves of bread, no longer employing locals on the ground. How do we get them to come back? Because we're South Africa, we're part of Africa, we don't want Africans to go anywhere. But how do we now say to them confidently, come back, you're safe?
There's a sense of anger, certainly by the President and the government, about this Sunday Times headline story of the weekend. And by some of us, there was a sense, Vusi, of outrage. There was a chill that we felt about it. I tell you what's interesting about that picture. That picture did more to focus the mind, because I think there's a galvanizing sort of set of events now happening against it because of that picture. What I would say to that journalists and the media in general, I think the President is unfair to almost go to the extent of blaming the media. The President also had a lot to say about a constituency where I supposedly belong to, the analysts, these smart people and so on. But there is a sense now in some communities. I happen to come from Regepa, that borders Ramaphosa. The same Ramaphosa where that Mozambican victim was so brutally burned to death in 2008. That Mozambique, that Ramaphosa is now calling back the business. So I think rationality will set in, people will claim. But at the end of the day, there's a fundamental responsibility on us as South Africans, government, civil society, corporate South Africa, to take a very, very hard look at ourselves and not be too worried about our image abroad and get things correct at home. I'm still suggesting to you, yes, we are outraged because it was a Mozambican, but we do these things against each other every weekend. Government's 2008 report, and I'm going to make a very, very controversial statement about this. The Social Cohesion Report of 2008, Vusi. Brilliant report. I mean, there's no university professor that I've seen wrote a report like Jonah Tsetenza and his colleagues did. They said most homicides in South Africa happen on a Friday evening between 10 o'clock and a Sunday morning, 6 o'clock, Sunday morning, so that weekend. And it happens typically around liquor outlets. But guess what? Because it's associated with a short man, with President Mbeki, we distance ourselves from it. So this Polokwanization of everything we must now get over it in this country. Everything is being Polokwanized, slates, factions, and so on. This nation needs certainly a national dialogue. But let me leave you with this provocative thought, though. I think, in a sense, we went through 1994, the transition, too easily. And we neglected to address fundamental scourges and problems and scars in the society, not in the least the devastating social ills that apartheid left us with. That's South Africa's Achilles heel. Again, it's not formal democracy. We will have elections on time next year. The ANC may even lose a metro or two. They might come to accept the result. It's the social violence that's playing itself out in this country.
And let me maybe bring Buz in here, and because you asked, we need to take a hard look in corporate South Africa. We know that there are expansive CSI budgets. There are budgets within corporate South Africa that, if you look at some of them, are close to billions. Why is that money not being used to address some of the issues that the professor is talking about? Because collectively, if you've got 6-7 multinationals pooling their CSI and developing talking, engaging, creating programs that address those issues, it not only talks about the legacy of potential legacy of the country, but also we're investing in the youth tomorrow, because surely they must be the corporate leaders of tomorrow.
I think what is coming out is such that the big business is not blowing its own trumpet in terms of what it is doing.
I agree.
That's a certain perspective. But if you look at the amount of work that is done through also the very social corporate investment programs, it's massive. There is evidence of how those effects have in terms of building up our country. But I will go on to say we're at a stage in this country where we need each other. We're at a stage there in our country where collectivism should be the order of the day. I think at this point in time, there are a number of references that we can make, what is good, what is not good, that has happened through big business. But we're at a stage, and that will be SACC's advocacy to ensure that we work together.
So
we get to the root of the problems.
We've run out of time. We've got a couple of comments that relates to xenophobia in business, and where relevant, I'll just ask for you to just share your thoughts on them very, very quickly. Sure. Okay, let's take a quick look at those comments. Remember, you can send them to SABC Newsroom. Let's look at our screen, and of course, these are some images behind me on the bright eye. If we look at, here comes from Ashur, it says, probably it's the first time since 21 years ago xenophobia in South Africa is threatening SA's business, political, commercial interests in sub-Saharan Africa. I think maybe might be forgetting the attacks of 2008. Football, business, entertainment, and at my ANC on the fight against xenophobia. We all have a part to play. Professor, very quickly, you touched on this quickly. That part to play, very, very quickly. How do we start playing our part?
No, I mean, the very least we can do is, as Vusi said, have serious dialogues with ourselves and with fellow Africans. But more than that, we have to embrace Africans. Let me just briefly, let's in 10 seconds say this to you. I would advise government, modestly, that the countries with the most progressive immigration laws happen to be the ones with the tightest immigration controls. So if you can't control your borders, there's a spillover. And as for African governments, yes, it's okay for President Mugabe to now send buses to repatriate its people. But there's been a sense of forced migration. And the challenge for African states, why are their citizens leaving their own countries in the first place, right? Or what are their responsibilities to create conditions? So there's a responsibility on us as South Africans to become more humane, but African states must also ask a question.
Next one comes from Dr. Musa. It says, South Africa is one of the best countries on the black continent with business opportunities and hospitality. Xenophobia has killed everything, I assume Dr. Musa is saying. This is a bit pessimistic, Mr. Khumalo. I mean, look, we are having this dialogue. We've seen the hashtags, we've seen the marches, we've seen the president, we've seen, as you said, on the ground, business is doing stuff. We need to be careful that we don't become too pessimistic about our current problem and we don't talk about the solutions. Quick comment from you.
At this point in time, we really don't need pessimism. We are on the vanguard. We need to be taking stand actions. We need to be working together. It's important for this country, for the continent, to ensure that we strengthen the policies. As Prof has alluded to, we need to ensure that we activate the systems that are already in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
So we're going to leave it there. This is our last tweet. It comes from the Visionary. It says, xenophobia is inhumane and extremely bad for business. And I'm sure my panel of experts will agree. That, of course, is Professor Chris Landsberg, who is the chairperson of African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the University of Johannesburg. And I'm joined by the SACCI president, Vusi Khumalo, sharing their thoughts on an interesting topic. I do think we need to keep on engaging on this. Gentlemen, thank you. Now let's take a look at the front pages of calls from around the globe, starting in Europe. And in actual fact, let's take a quick look at the tweet of the day. Comes from David Makura. It says, any attempt to rationalize, justify, sugarcoat xenophobia and give it intellectual cover must be condemned as a political opportunism. Okay, that comes. Let's take a look at the newspapers now from around the globe, starting Europe. With the Times, you'll see European leaders are prepared to approve a military mission to capture and destroy human traffickers' boats in response to the deaths of up to 900 migrants off the Libyan coast. Then moving to Israel, in the Jerusalem Post, Israel will honor more than 23,000 soldiers and civilian victims of wars and terrorism who have fallen in the past year. And lastly, in Nigeria, in the Vanguard, looks at a group of angry Nigerians who marched to the South African High Commission in Abuja yesterday. They threatened to shut down South African companies in Nigeria over xenophobic attacks against Nigerians and other foreigners in South Africa. Let's take a look at what's happening around the country today. We start in Johannesburg, where the 4 men who allegedly killed Mozambican Emmanuel Sithole at the weekend are expected to appear in the Alexandra Magistrates Court today. Then still in Johannesburg, strip club owner Lolly Jackson's alleged killer George Luca will today hear if he will receive medical care for his lung cancer or continue to get treatment behind bars. Judge Geraldine Borchers is expected to deliver her ruling on the matter in the Palm Ridge Magistrates Court. And then in Pretoria, National Director of Public Prosecutions, Deputy Nkobo Jiba, is expected to appear in the Pretoria Regional Court on 2 counts of fraud and 1 of perjury. Okay, now members from the South African Football Association joined the call to say no to xenophobia and shared their views on the attacks that happened around South Africa while they were playing in Gabon. South Africa President Daniel John, Chairman of the PSL, Dr. Ivan Khoza, and Bafana coach Sheikh Mashaba had this to say. Take a look at this clip.
I'm saying that as South Africans, let us be responsible as always, being responsible and make sure that we protect the gains that we've achieved. That what we have achieved in 1994, it was not a miracle. It was because of the capacity and the capability which we have.
We in football, there's no doubt that we are part of Africa. We can only play against African teams. We only can speak in wonderful ways of praising how we were received. Sheikh Mashaba can talk to you about how we were received in Equatorial Guinea and Gabon. And whoever we want to play, they are ready. We even now spoke to the people of Malawi, of Mozambique, and tomorrow I'm going to Mozambique, to the people of Zimbabwe, and they are ready to play against us.
Dudes and dudettes, did you know that us young people make up more than like 1/3 of South Africa's population, but only like 1/4 of the voters? I mean, what's up with that? We're the ones who can make a difference. You, me, everybody. Register and make it happen. Cheers, dudes.
All cities in Africa, there exists a unique and vibrant street culture which dictates the heartbeat of many cities throughout the African continent.
The city of Johannesburg is filled with vibrant scenes of hawking and selling.
This was from overseas. I think it's a donation from overseas. Now they're delivering to us.
Further up north, the same experience can be found as eager buyers barter with their hawkers.
The languages may be different, but the similarities are the one common thread that bind us all together as citizens of Africa.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays, 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom. Thank you for joining us. Now, Corruption Watch has urged stronger measures to enhance integrity within SAPS. The body have submitted their input on the draft white paper on the police to the Civilian Secretariat for the Police, raising concern at widely perceived prevalence of corruption and lack of accountability at the leadership level of the police. Last Friday, Western Cape Police Commissioner Arno Lamour and 5 others appeared at the Goodwood Regional Court with 109 counts, which included racketeering, corruption, defeating the ends of justice and fraud. Corruption Watch has forwarded strong proposals to clean and strengthen the image and integrity of the police force. From Corruption Watch, we have Head of Legal and Investigations, Leanne Govinsamy. Leanne, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sam.
Let's talk about why this was such an important report to put together for Corruption Watch. And I think, you know, with everything that's happening, obviously it's clear that it's a very important report.
Okay, Sam, we regard integrity and transparency within the police as being just paramount in engendering public confidence in the police services. I mean, you think of the people who would want to report corruption to the police, for example. If they are members or police officers in senior leadership positions who are involved in corruption, you can imagine the hesitance of the general public in reporting these acts of corruption. You know, the knock-on effects of senior leaders being involved in corruption are potentially endless. You have young recruits thinking this is just, business as usual within the police services. So those are some of our concerns in regard to integrity.
We don't often kind of measure that knock-on effect. It takes us back to Jackie Salibi. We're talking about other high-profile policemen that have been involved in one way or another in dubious activities. Is there a yardstick or measuring stick to actually measure the knock-on effect? Have we spoken to young recruits or other policemen to see whether their morale, if they still have a high morale for their job, whether it's affected their confidence in even other policemen or the colleagues they're working with?
Okay, so Corruption Watch wouldn't have necessarily conducted these large-scale surveys, but we can see from the reaction from the general public what effect this is having. Any newspaper account or media account of these officials being involved in this corruption kind of elicits responses, difficult to read, because you would think that the police, as being kind of the bearers of our constitutional principles, are now being subjected to these attacks. And for us, that's really disappointing. Having spoken to a brigadier in the police force quite recently, he does speak about how young police officers, recently kind of joining the police force, having to come with him with these sorts of problems, having to seek advice. What do I do? It seems to be happening all around me. How do I address it? So, there's a kind of moral pull on these police officers, and we say, how do we assist them? We are really also interested in what are the socioeconomic factors that affect the police officers in arriving at one decision or the other. What are the social pressures that exist? And you've got to understand what the problem is on the ground before you implement any measures. And this is our main problem with the white paper. Has enough research gone into understanding this problem of integrity and corruption? And we don't think that, that has been done.
You've come up with some strong ideas on how to clean and strengthen the image and integrity of the police. I want to touch on that, but before we get to that, and maybe you can tie it into your answers, just how prevalent is corruption within the police service? And do you have one practical example that you can share with us?
It's quite prevalent. I can tell you that in a National Victims of Crime survey, the second most likely form of public sector corruption was regarded by 13% of households as being corruption within the police. And this is quite a high number when you contextualize it. In terms of the reports that we receive a high number of reports which implicate police officials in, bribery involving small amounts of money to larger amounts of money. But what is really concerning, and the example that I'll give you, I won't go into too many details, is abuse of power. We find that a lot of the reports that are coming to us say police officers are intimidating me. They are intimidating me in my communities. They are demanding large sums of money. For what? Merely for the right to live in safety or the right to be left alone. Okay. And this is, I think, the most concerning, parts of the corrupt activity that we found.
Let's touch on those strong ideas that Corruption Watch has on how to clean, strengthen the image and the integrity of the police force. What are some of them?
Okay, so the first thing we've said is, in this white paper, there's very little reference to the existing anti-corruption strategies. I mean, the police have done an amazing job of drafting their anti-corruption strategy. They've got 4 pillars to it. It's detection, prevention, investigation, and resolution. Where is the reference to that? Where is the reference to the National Development Plan? Chapter 14 deals with corruption. There are other chapters that deal with the National Policing Board. We want it to be a holistic, integrated approach to addressing corruption in the police.
And yeah, very quickly, I don't want to just leave it on a negative note, but there are police that are not corrupt.
Definitely.
It's a few in the bunch that's just basically creating a bad name for everybody. How do we get rid of the rotten apples very quickly?
So I think, firstly, the ones that are not corrupt, you've got to incentivize kind of good practices. and where people are making difficult decisions, in the face of having to address corruption. And I think it's about hiring of people. You've got to have standards of transparency in hiring the right people to the right positions.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us. That's
Thank you, Sam.
Head of Legal and Investigations at Corruption Watch, Leanne Govetsami, sharing her thoughts on the white paper, the draft white paper. Okay, let's just take a look at your tweets. Please remember you can send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. And it comes from Denise Johnston at 67 Blankets. We've been seeing this broadcast on Morning Live, the program a little bit earlier. All the best with the world record. No matter what the outcome, you do a great work. Well done. Hashtag 67 Blankets. And of course, that's in honor of our late Tata Madiba. This comes from Impilo Collection, who says, at 67 Blankets, at Caroline Stain, at Colourful Stitches Ubuntu, hashtag to no xenophobia, hashtag to Union Buildings, hashtag Pretoria. Then it's a beautiful, beautiful sea of blankets at hashtag 67 Blankets. Comes from Tokologo Mokwena, who says the colour lawns of hashtag Union Buildings. And if you did see the broadcast this morning, it looks absolutely amazing. Here's maybe a bit of a better aerial view, and it starts with at Local is Lekker. It says, well done and good luck at 67 Blankets at Caroline Stain. And what a great initiative. A lot of people learning to knit. In actual fact, I do knit. I only knit scarves. We're going to go to an ad break in a minute. Okay, so we're not going to go to an ad break. We're going to go to your tweet pick of the day. Now, today's picture of the day comes from Johannesburg. A photo walk is captioned, hashtag 67 Blankets. It was also part of our tweets. You just saw it. This, of course, at the Union Buildings. And now let's take a look at some of your comments on Facebook. Today's tweet of the day comes from the Gauteng Premier, David Makura. We did show it to you a little bit later. Any attempt to rationalize, justify, sugarcoat xenophobia and give it intellectual cover must be condemned as political opportunism. We showed you that a little bit earlier. Okay, now let's take a look at what's happening on your Newsroom Facebook page today. And those pictures we flashed a little bit earlier. It says academics from BRICS countries, Brazil, China and South Africa are gathering at the University of the Western Cape this week to focus on transformation in global food systems in the African, South American and Southeast Asian regions. Then tens of thousands of children in Senegal are being exploited by chronic teachers who force them to beg in the streets. Human Rights Watch is blaming the government for failing to implement a law on forced begging, and an airstrike on a Scud missile base in the Houthi region of Yemeni capital Sana'a triggered a big explosion that killed 25 people and wounded almost 400 yesterday. You can find all of these stories and more on our Newsroom Facebook page or visit our SABC website at www.sabc.co.za/news. Okay, now's the time to take an ad break. Continue watching Newsroom.
Oh, hi. Just brushing up on my party. We are going to make it number 12. Official. Let me teach you a quick word. Yeah. Kwaitosta. A woman who has mastered the art of dancing in high heels. It's up and flick. Up and flick.
Help make Party South Africa's 12th official language. Sign the petition today.
Okay. Selfie?
No.
We live in a digital era, and the number of Africans with mobile phones is rapidly increasing.
Twitter use is predominantly being done on smartphones. This is a very African phenomenon.
Here, there are constantly new innovative ways to make the internet more affordable. With that, we're seeing protests against governments proposing methods to limit access. On Network, we give you information about all of this. We also have new computers, games, and robots.
Join Siphumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 19:30 CAT.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. A fourth suspect will join 3 others in court today for the murder of Mozambican national Emmanuel Sithole. Sithole died in Alexandra, north of Johannesburg, over the weekend. The 35-year-old was stabbed to death. Police say the killing cannot yet be linked to attacks against foreign nationals in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. EFF leader Julius Malema says no amount of intimidation will prevent him from continuing with his anti-xenophobia campaign. This after an EFF member was shot from a hostel while party members were preparing for Malema's arrival in Alexandra yesterday. Malema also said the killing of Mozambican Emmanuel Sithole at the weekend was a pure act of criminality. Lolly Jackson's alleged killer will know today if he will receive private medical care. The Palm Ridge Magistrates Court on the East Rand is expected to rule whether George Luca will be freed. The Department of Correctional Services has applied to have Luca released from custody to be treated privately for lung cancer. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Sam, back to you.
Thanks, Anine. Now, significant changes are taking place within businesses around the world, and South African women are certainly making great progress. However, equality in leadership positions is evolving at a slow rate, widening the gap between male and females in the workplace. Joining us in studio today is CEO and strategist from Basara Leadership Partners, Dudu Msomi. Dudu, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about that intro very quickly. The fact that this gap is widening and it's developing at a very slow rate. Why is it developing at a slow rate?
I think sometimes the economic situation impacts in terms of the rate of change that's happening, because during the recession, companies are not as risky in terms of incorporating women into their leadership. So you actually saw a dip in terms of numbers. But South Africa is steady and it's doing better.
We're still talking about women in leadership roles. Why haven't we advanced this conversation? Is that because we are actually still finding ourselves at the beginning of this conversation, that we haven't spent enough time talking about it? We don't see enough women in very senior leadership positions. What are the reasons? Why are we still talking about women in leadership 21 years in our democracy?
Yeah, and it's a global conversation. It's not just a South African conversation. That's because when you look at populations in most countries, 50%, sometimes 52% are women. So you will expect that representativity will be across every sector, government, private sector. So the fact that in most countries, including South Africa, you'll find that leadership in government is more representative, and yet in private sector it's not. So it's a conversation that continues because women are an important part of decision making, and they're not incorporated in the corporate decision making.
You would think that after President Zuma has been quite outspoken about women leadership within government, that it would have had some kind of knock-on effect in corporate structures. Why didn't that filter through?
You would have thought so, because our legislation was designed to do that. We have employment equity, we have broad-based black economic empowerment, and they have the pillars. So procurement was supposed to be a huge impact in terms of the domino effect, because everybody was supposed to make sure that whoever they are having as their service provider will be representative. But there is no stick, unfortunately, which is unfortunate because people usually say it's better to have a carrot than a stick. But the carrot just seems not to be working.
Where are we sitting in the country at the moment? And maybe from a global conversation, from an African conversation, where are we sitting in moving women through the corporate structure into that leadership roles? I know that you're part of a mentorship program, but in terms of numbers, where are we sitting at?
Numbers vary depending. We had business women South Africa in the past that used to do the annual survey. But I think it's important to go beyond the numbers. We have to look at why is it that we focus so much on leadership. And the real reason is because they focus on strategy and vision. They're the ones that make the day-to-day decisions that impact all our lives, whether in the community. So let's focus on that. And in South Africa, we're focusing on entrepreneurship now. I mean, big companies cannot grow jobs as much as us starting our own businesses. So we now need to look at, all of us in small companies are either CEOs and managers. So let us look at that level and look at what skills they need to have in order to be able to be effective in what they do.
How does mentorship play a role?
Mentorship plays a crucial role, and it is voluntary. You don't pay somebody. It's based on somebody else's experience. So somebody who has advanced experience in whatever area you want to advance in kind of mentors you and takes you along. So, for example, there is an expectation that sometimes when you're a CEO and you're an accomplished person, you don't need a mentor. I've just been selected to be part of the Sherry Blair Foundation Women in Mentorship. So it's a former First Lady of the UK. So they have a mentorship, a mentorship program. And it's driven through technology, so it's cross-border. So my mentor is going to be from anywhere in the world. So I've been selected. So even when you think you're an accomplished leader, you can always learn from somebody else. And South Africa's challenge is to be in the global environment and to be thriving in the global environment. So it's very important that we also look for mentors outside of our borders.
Talking about leadership in that discussion, on the 20th of June, you've got a conference coming up, and that also looks at leadership.
Yeah. Leadership for me is an important level. We always say the fish rots from the head. If we do not look at our leadership level, we will have problems. And leadership, not just in positional, but also our self-leadership as individuals. So on the 20th of June at the Hilton in Durban, we're having a masterclass, which is called Life is a Jungle Gym, Not a Balancing Act, because we then get very caught up in work-life balance. In life, there is no balance. It all depends on what's happening at that point in time and how effective you are in the roles that you are playing in. So that's the kind of skills and expertise we'll be imparting on that day.
Quickly, we haven't touched on young girls being groomed for positions of leadership. How do we develop maybe for a lack of a better term, a strategy or implement some kind of action where we identify young girl leaders?
We all have to be on the lookout. We really cannot expect to have formal structures doing this for us. I was lucky. Krista Bonet, who is the founder of the Difference Makers, is the one that actually nominated me. So there are people that observe you in life and kind of say, hey, can I give you a helping hand as an entrepreneur? That's what we should all be doing for each other. You don't just close your network and only help people within your circle. You need to start being aware of people around you and how you can help them.
We're going to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us here in studio, the CEO and strategist from Busawa Leadership Partners, Tudunsomi, sharing her thoughts on women leaders. Okay, let's have a look at what people are saying on Twitter. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. And it goes from Gola, who says, this xenophobia saga in South Africa is seriously getting out of hand. Poor Emmanuel Sitole at Stop Xenophobia Attacks. We did, in the bulletin a little bit earlier, share some information around that. The 4 alleged killers will be in court today. Hashtag Emmanuel Sitole. Killers can be equated to a terrorist group. They must be convicted speedily. And that comes from hashtag No to Xenophobia. Hashtag Africa We Are One. That comes from Donald. Okay, from Lindeka, it says Kanti Emmanuel Sitole was killed for cigarettes. And just some reaction to the death of an African, Emmanuel Sitole, over the past weekend. From Intizo says, I'm glad to hear reporters in fact helped Emmanuel Sitole and drove him to hospital. I withdraw my statement about media with no scruples. Okay, and that is just some of your comments, and that's how we come to the end of our program here today. We absolutely enjoy you watching and interacting with us. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the show available on demand on your YouTube channel. We love to interact and enjoy your contributions and opinions. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning. From us.
must say that goal was outstanding.
Made so much dust that I couldn't see.